Though I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire, but have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. I may give all I possess and striving soul my love profess, but not be given by love within. The prophet soon turns strangely thin.
Let us be a faith that gathers, reaching for one another through the walls of hate others build, through the cages of ignorance and arrogance, and through the fear that burns city streets. Let us be a faith that sees a vision of a better world, more compassionate, more just, more holy, and with more love. There is a faith that binds up the broken, cauterizes battle wounds with the balm of peace, sings longer and louder than the trumpets of war. Let us be that faith too. Let us be the ones who do not tread lightly in this world, but light it up with our love, who hold up the mirror of worth and dignity, who are the sanctuary others seek. But first, let us be the faith that worships together, here, this morning, in this space, at this moment. Let us be a faith. Unitarian Universalists, when they gather, light a chalice. Today, we light this chalice as a beacon of reason and hope. I have a chalice lit here, and you will see one appear on your screen. And I say these words to you. Today, we light this chalice as a beacon of reason and hope in the Unitarian Universalist way. But deep in the heart of this beacon of light and reason, the mystery of history remains. The legacies of the past, of Judaism and Christianity and the worship of the sun gods and the resurrected Mithras, to gaze into the flame you kindle at home and cherish the chalice that we light here today, that opens the doors to past, present, and future, and the eternal right here, right now. There now, the chalice is lit and the church is in session. I invite you as the gathered congregation to say the covenant that Red River Unitarian Universalists always say, their spoken affirmation of faith. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. Our opening thought today is from the Jesus scholar, John Dominic Crossan, who has said, "It is impossible to avoid the suspicion that historical Jesus research is a very safe place to do theology and call it history, to do autobiography and call it biography." Enjoy now the opening song.
Love is here right now.
first reading is from the Gospel of Mark. It's going to be heavy on gospel readings today, and they're going to be from Mark because Mark is the tightest gospel, and it's all about the story of Jesus and Holy Week, as we call it, this being Palm Sunday in the Christian calendar. So bear with me, but I hope it will be all right. It's a pretty exciting story if you can get past the seriousness with which many Christians honor Holy Week. The original Holy Week was not a solemn occasion. The original Holy Week was a whole time of excitement, and Mark's gospel really brings that out. So I'm going to read from the translation, or rather the interpretation called the Message, which really isn't a translation at all. It's an interpretation. It will give you an idea of what was happening. This is a wartime gospel, actually, that Mark wrote in about 70 AD. So it's a time machine. He's writing it 30 years later. Here's what Jesus was doing. He continued teaching in the temple. Here with the reading. Watch out for the religion scholars, Jesus said. They love to walk around in academic gowns, preening in the radiance of public flattery, basking in prominent positions, sitting at the head table at every church function. And all the time, they are exploiting the weak and helpless. The longer their prayers, the worse they get, but they'll pay for it in the end. Sitting across from the offering box, Jesus was observing how the crowd tossed money in for the collection. Many of the rich were making large contributions. One poor widow came up and put in 2 small coins, a measly 2 cents. Jesus called the disciples over and said, "The truth is that this poor widow gave more to the collection than all the others put together. All the others gave what they'll never miss. She gave extravagantly what she couldn't afford. She gave her all." Here ends that part of the reading, Mark 12, 38, 44. I'm going to read now Mark 13, verses 1 through 11. As he walked away from the temple, one of his disciples said, "Teacher, look at that stonework, those buildings." Jesus said, "You're impressed by that grand architecture? There's not a stone in the whole works that's not going to end up in a heap of rubble." Later, as he was sitting on Mount Olives in full view of the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew got him off by himself and asked, "Tell us, when is all this going to happen? What sign will we get that things are coming to a head?" Jesus began, "Watch out for doomsday deceivers. Many leaders are going to show up with forged identities claiming, 'I'm the one.' They will deceive a lot of people. When you hear of wars and rumored wars, keep your head and don't panic. This is routine history and no sign of the end. Nation will fight nation, ruler fight ruler over and over. Earthquakes will occur in various places. There will be famines, but these things are nothing compared to what's coming. Watch out. They're going to drag you into court, and then it will go from bad to worse. Dog eat dog, everyone at your throat, because you carry my name. You're placed there as sentinels to truth. The message has to be preached all across the world. When they bring you betrayed into court, don't worry about what you'll say. When the time comes, say what's on your heart. The Holy Spirit will make his witness in and through you." Here ends the reading. So that was a lot of reading. That was a lot of story about Jesus claiming he will tear down the temple. And now for our practices. There's a poet writing today named Steve Garnaas Holmes. I like him very much. He works with scripture and makes contemporary, contemplative poetry out of it. Our practices today will be to meditate on a poem that Steve has written called Destroy This Temple. So even you non-theists among you, even you post-believers, post-Christians, please take a breath and reflect with me, if you will, on the words of this poem, because I think it might help us all find a place where we can start over in this springtime season. Hear now these words: destroy this temple. Oh, Holy One, give me courage to destroy the sacred structures so familiar and safe that sustain my habits and beliefs and protect my benefit while sacrifices are made on my behalf. Not my life, not my blood. Give me the audacity to overturn the tables of racism, to drive out the money changers of privilege and entitlement. Give me courage to disrupt the worship of myself, the temple of my own well-being, so the body of my self-giving may be raised. Give me courage to allow life to tear me down and raise up even me. In our practices, in our meditation, let us allow ourselves to become more than we are by giving up all of the false selves that prevent us from being our real self. And now for a moment of quiet and rest, leading into a time of musical response.
The Lord is my shepherd, I have all I need. She makes me lie down in green meadows, beside the still waters she will lead. She restores my soul, she rights my wrongs. She leads me in the path of good things. She fills my heart with songs. Even though I walk through a dark and dreary land, there is nothing that can shake me. She has said she won't forsake me. I'm in her hand. She sets a table before me in the presence of my foes. She anoints my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely, surely goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in her house forever. and daughter, and to the Holy of Holies, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul.
I'm Marilyn Alexander, and I want to talk to you about supporting Red River. My husband Gil and I were active in a church when we were in college in Commerce, Texas. But when we moved to Montana, we found our spirituality in the fantastic opportunities provided by nature. When we moved back to this area after 40 years there, we needed more. Mostly, we needed a community of like-minded friends. We found that at our RUU. We had never pledged, but came to understand that much of the budget for operating this wonderful church is based on the promise of annual pledges. So we pledged what we could afford, and we were proud to know that we were committed to supporting this community that we cherished. He's gone now, but I find purpose in the work I'm able to do at our RUU and the support that I can provide. I hope you feel the same as I do about Red River and want to pledge what you can afford as well. Payments can be made weekly, monthly, annually, or whatever you choose. As you look forward to the day when we can again meet in our beautiful and unique building, please give cheerfully as you prepare to return again to the land of your soul.
Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul.
As we return to the program, I reflect that we have moved through a small holy time together. We've had the excitement of entering Jerusalem with Jesus in the procession. Then we took a moment to think about it all. And now I'm going to give you some more story about that week. And I'll begin with a short reading from Mark and then the discourse. Mark 14, verses 1 through 2. In only 2 days, the 8-day festival of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread would begin. The high priests and religion scholars were looking for a way they could seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. They agreed that it should not be done during Passover week. We don't want the crowds up in arms, they said. Here ends that portion of the reading. I will begin the discourse for now, but the story from Mark will be continued as we go. I promise you the real truth about Easter, part 1. and we are undercover in Jerusalem. Thank you for indulging me when I retell this story. Same story for more than 2,000 years, but I think you can trust me when I say there are parts of the story you may not have heard. I came across some new parts of the story, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. I didn't grow up Christian, as many of you know. I came to this late in life. So for me, it was all pretty exciting. And recently, when I started reflecting on this, I picked up a new book, new to me. It's been out a few years. Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan's book from a few years back called The Last Week, day-by-day account of Jesus' final week in Jerusalem. Who knew? It's marvelous. I thought I was going to build this whole little two-part sermon series on a play that I had written years ago called Breathing Together. And I will refer to that next week when we solve the mystery. But this book excited me so, I thought, well, let's use it. It talks about the Easter event beginning with Palm Sunday, as we call it now, and the mystery and the excitement that happened in it. Now, look, the Easter event was such a big deal in the Western world that even non-believers, even some of you people, humanists, you post-Christians, must realize that all the peeps in the world, all the candies, all the Russell Stover in the world is there for a reason. The Easter event changed the Western world. It was a perfect confluence of events, brilliantly turned into a movement by the followers of Jesus, not the 12 disciples. They were big failures, which we'll talk about later, but a reform and resistance movement that later got co-opted, a remarkable turn of events, the way it was eventually narrated by Mark's gospel and later by the other writers of the gospels. I say all these things offering grace to anyone who believes that it was a resurrection miracle of one kind or another, and to those who withhold judgment. Either way, it is clear that history reached a turning point in Jerusalem that year. Whether or not the Easter miracle was factual, it changed the world in a way that was actual. So here are a few disruptive things you may not know, or if you knew them once, you may need to be reminded. For one thing, I bet you didn't know that Jesus didn't just show up in Jerusalem. They had been traveling for miles, for many days, from Caesarea Philippi. And the Palm Sunday procession that he organized was deliberately timed to crash into a pagan procession that was bringing the imperial folk, including Pontius Pilate, to town. Jesus and his people were coming from the east. The pagans were coming from the west. It was a show of imperial force. I didn't know that. So the image that we have of people languidly waving palm branches as Buddy Jesus rolls by is absolutely the wrong image for Palm Sunday. The way Christians observe Holy Week in this solemn, measured, quiet fashion is not at all like the busy, crowded, feverish Passover week festival of the original, not yet Holy Week. So what we should have in our minds is the urgency of Jesus taunting the empire by blocking the imperial procession riding on a slow pony. And that's not all. When we dig into Mark's account of Holy Week, all those Jesus little discourses and conversations, those movements through Jerusalem, we see deliberate intent there. He was there to cause trouble, good trouble, John Lewis would have said. Every single one of those discourses is designed to provoke the empire. Some of them do not sound like much to us. Some of them we think maybe are tedious. We've heard it before. That's right. 2,000 years later, we've heard them before. They're not fresh topics anymore. but they were then. For example, tearing down the temple. He means the establishment. That's what he means. He doesn't mean just the stones. Jesus has already set himself up against the domination systems that ruled the ancient world, the Romans that ruled Jerusalem. Now, Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan have pointed out that most systems, most of the time, that rule most civilizations are domination systems. It's not unusual. It's not particularly pathological. Jesus was not perhaps a particularly unique revolutionary. Reading the Hebrew Bible, I read so many passages where Yahweh God is called upon against the domination systems that are provoking and oppressing the Hebrew people. Jesus just happens to have been the one that stuck at the time. Some scholars would even say that Jesus and the Jesus mythology was actually created by the establishment that later co-opts Jesus and Christianity. But that gets us into pretty heady theoretical territory. And I don't want to talk theory. I want to talk mystery. So Jesus is coming into town with his followers to cause trouble. Simple as that. He's traveled for weeks to get to Jerusalem and to be there when Pilate is there, coming from the west to show the imperial power. Jerusalem itself is the establishment, but Jerusalem is also the center of the region, and it is still the holiest place. It is the highest hope for the people of God. As Isaiah the prophet says, it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. So the stage is set for drama, processions, discourses, Jesus disrupting the temple or doing what the scholars call his temple tantrum. And by the way, Jesus is not punishing the money changers. The money changers are there doing legitimate business. We get the impression that Jesus is anti-Judaism because of the way Mark writes that 30 years later. Jesus was protesting the way the temple traffic flow was being disrupted by some renovations that were going on. Actually, it's very technical, but Mark comes in 30 years later. Remember, Mark is writing it later when the temple is being destroyed and there was a rebellion going on. He writes it down later, leaves everybody confused about what Jesus actually said. It's a sloppy piece of gospel writing, Mark, and it really wasn't worthy of you because the rest of the account is pretty well locked down. Like the part where Jesus curses the fig tree because it wouldn't give him a fig. That part, very tricky. Everybody wonders exactly what Jesus' real deal was. The fig tree symbolizes Jerusalem. Mark knew this, and the temple, and speaks of the coming of the Son of Man. Anyway, most of the account that Mark gives of Jesus in Jerusalem during that week is very tight. The challenges to Jesus and his wisdom from people in the crowd, all in a public setting, all of it designed to show how Jesus provokes the authorities. All of the attempts to trap him, right? The challenge and riposte stories. They ask questions, he stonewalls them, he misdirects, he's downright rude from time to time. They ask Jesus, by what authority do you do and say these things? And he says, I'm not going to tell you. He tells parables, but these are not his friendly farmer sowing seeds and little lost lamb parables. No, they're greedy tenant and murderous landlord parables now. They try to arrest him, but they're afraid to. They try to trick him into speaking seditious things against the emperor, but he's too slick for them. They go away, saying basically, foil again, curses. I mean, the thing about rendering to Caesar, the things that are Caesar's, and rendering to God, the things that are God, that was very slick. You got to give him that. We all remember that. That one had legs. We're still saying that one today. And then when he talks about the temple, that comment about the stones of the temple, apparently those stones were something like more than 60 feet long and 9 feet high. They were huge. So when Jesus says, not one stone will be left upon another, it is a memorable statement. Jesus is echoing what Jeremiah said, the prophet Jeremiah said hundreds of years ago about the first temple. Jesus is pronouncing judgment against the system of domination and collaboration that is centered in the temple. And it's not a judgment against Judaism or ritual, but against the temple and the collaborators there who are robbing the heritage. Now, Mark, the gospel writer, records all these public confrontations to show just how much trouble Jesus was making. And then the private conversation, when he warns his disciples about the disruptions to come, the wars and rumors of wars thing. Scholars call this passage the little apocalypse, sort of a preparation for the big apocalypse that will come later in Revelation. So all of this rich story that is written down by Mark, 30 or 40 years after the fact, remember, this story that's been handed down for a generation by the early followers of Jesus and is not particularly well attested among the contemporary literature of the time. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar, and I'm not an ancient scholar. And I know that people will say, well, yes, but Josephus mentions, and they will point to fragmentary references here and there. But it's not a very compelling argument. It's not a compelling argument for people of the book. If all of this was so exciting, why didn't someone write it down at the time? Well, I don't know the answer to that. Borg and Crossan make the point that all 12 of Jesus's handpicked apostles really failed. They really failed. I don't have them memorized, but I'm reading now. They were Andrew, the first chosen, Simon Peter, James, Zebedee, John Zebedee, Philip the Curious, honest Nathaniel, Matthew, Levi, Thomas Didymus, the later doubting Thomas, James and Judas Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. They failed. They couldn't stop what was happening. They couldn't stay awake the night before his crucifixion and arrest. They were nowhere to be found when he is crucified. You may remember Peter denies him 3 times. Judas sells him out for 30 pieces. They failed. All 12 of these men failed. And nobody wrote down anything that we know of. So I don't know how we got Christianity. And that's really an unanswerable question. If you're a person that enjoys arguing insolvable arguments or arguments that can go on forever, maybe you used to be at one point and then you decided to become a Unitarian Universalist and now you don't do that anymore. I don't know, but one of them goes like this. The argument for Christianity is that, well, 1 billion people can't be crazy. Or one argument for Christianity is, it had to be a miracle because the truth is that it's just as convincing as there were eyewitnesses. That's one argument. But then the argument against Christianity is that all the circumstantial evidence for the world being flat had everyone convinced as well. C.S. Lewis is a marvelous apologist for Christianity. I read him all the time. But in my opinion, all of those arguments are, yeah, they're entertaining perhaps, but at my stage in life, they're not the best use of my time. Here's where I'm going to stand. It's the same as arguing about the existence of God, because no one has ever been able to offer any evidence for or against the existence of God that a mortal mind can comprehend by definition. Am I right? In other words, I have absolutely delighted in the premise that possibly someone uniquely divine shattered some multiverse boundary in our reality and left our universe a little more grace-filled than it was. I have no problem believing that at all. And here's my baseline. When I look at Christianity, when I look at the Jesus Christ event, what happened there, I feel the same way as I do when I look at the Grand Canyon. Something happened there. But I digress. We have a mystery to solve. We're not going to argue it by arguing theology. We're not going to solve it by arguing theology. There is a clue to the mystery of Easter, and I'm going to give it to you. It's right in the text. And I promise you that if you tune in on Easter Sunday, we'll solve the mystery of what happened to Jesus's body. The mystery of the disappearance of the body of Jesus is central for some people to understanding Christianity. So let me finish reading the reading that's listed in the program, Mark's 15th chapter, verses 33 to 47. This is the chapter where he describes the crucifixion of Jesus. And when I read it, let's see if you get the clue for the mystery that I will reveal on Easter next week. Here begins Mark's gospel. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, listen, he is calling for Elijah. And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, gave it to him to drink, and said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now, when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was God's son. There were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. These used to follow him and provided for him when he was in Galilee. And there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. Here ends the reading. And this is the part that's always written, it's there, but it's all a casual, almost unremarkable aside. But it's the pivotal point in Mark's gospel, that phrase. There were also women looking on from a distance. 2,000 years later, we're all noticing the divine feminine, aren't we? Jesus was already discoursing with women at the well, the importunate widow, the woman with the issue of blood, and all kinds of women. 2,000 years later, we're congratulating ourselves for seeing women as valuable people. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was doing that when all of his peers were still thinking of them as property. 2,000 years on, there are still churches where I can't serve communion. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was telling Martha it was right for her to stop serving and just hang out instead of waiting on people all the time. We are so clever and so proud of ourselves for how far we've come in 2,000 years, to have advanced so far, to believe that we now are discerning the sacred feminine in the scriptures, when Jesus was apparently discerning the sacred feminine in the women walking right beside him. So, up until now, we have had a very good record of the events leading up to Easter. And now the mystery begins. Jesus has died on the Hill of Skulls, and he's about to be buried in a tomb behind a giant stone, not quite as big as a temple building stone, but pretty big. And by all accounts, his body is going to miraculously disappear. And from that miraculous disappearance, we're going to have an Easter miracle and a movement, and now 1 billion people calling themselves Christians. But nobody wrote anything down at the time. Nobody wrote anything down for a whole generation. The contemporary written record wasn't much either. All 12 of Jesus' handpicked men failed. But there were also women looking on from a distance. Holy Week begins now in Christian communities, Christian adjacent communities, and any community that wishes to delve into the ways in which religious observances, prophets, poets, the marginalized can subvert systems of dominance. Holy Week begins now for all those people. And I suggest that they look to Jerusalem, for that's where the mystery began. On Easter, we'll solve the mystery, and we will all rise up in Jerusalem. May it be so. Amen.
Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikolana Mbuso wami awukholana, ilondoloze zuhambe nami, dawo yami ayikholana. Mbuso wami awukholana, ilondoloze zuhambe nami, ilondoloze, ilondoloze, ilondoloze zungangishilana, ilondoloze, ilondoloze, ilondoloze zungangishilana, dawo yami ayikholana. Mbuso wami awukholana, ilondoloze zuhambe nami.
Our parting thought comes from Marcus Borg, who is also the author of Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. He gives us this thought. Faith in God, faith in loyalty to God involves confronting and challenging the many sources of unnecessary human misery and suffering, most of which are unjust and violent, humanly created social systems. That was central to Jesus. He was executed by the powers who ruled his world because he had become a radical critic of the way things were. Christians are called to participate in his passion for a different kind of world. And now please receive this benediction. It was written by a friend of mine, Wayne Arneson, and he, along with my friends and all of our friends, will say to you and take with you this blessing. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. And now we'll extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Hi there. I want to remind you to join us April 4th, Easter Sunday, for part 2, The Real Truth About Easter. Women change the world in secret. We're going to solve the mystery of Easter. Wait, I think I just gave it away. Women will change the world in secret. Please join us. I'll see you then. Bye now.